I'm gonna shut this off audio.
I just don't think it's in the cards that we're going to come back anytime soon. But I could be completely wrong. We're completely set up. We were supposed to go to hybrid Monday at my school, and that got postponed. And so it's very,
Wow.
it's very up in the air.
All right, let's have some fun.
Okay, ready, guys? Ready? 4
Yes.
o'clock. Okay. Is it? We have Barney. Who will we have? Barney, Brian, and Terry. Is Lori joining us?
No.
Okay. All right. Then, absent that, I am going to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of the Park District of Highland Park for Thursday, October 22nd, 2020 at exactly 4 p.m. Roxanne, can you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bernstein,
Here.
Commissioner Grossberg,
Here,
Vice President Kaplan,
I'm here.
President Ruttenberg.
I am here.
Great. We have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is public comment for items on the agenda. Executive Director Romes, do we have any public comment by any emails or anything else by telephone calls?
No, we do not.
Great. Absence of any public comments, we're going to go on to the next item on the agenda, which is the updated financial forecast. Director Peters to present.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. And do you see the updated financial forecast on your screen? Okay, great. All right, let me get that into presentation mode. Okay, so here we go. All right, so if you recall, we look at our financial forecast every month, and we have our disclaimer every month. These financial statements are as of September 30th, 2020. First, we're going to look at our operations and our general and recreation funds. And as we see each month, we look at our original budgeted cash on hand at the end of the year was projected to be at just under $12 million. And right now we are looking to end the year at just under $11 million. And if you keep in mind the board policy, the 25% reserve is about $4.6 million. And so we will be definitely in line with our reserve, our required reserve at the end of the year. Our next chart that I think we're used to looking at too is our operations, our general and recreation funds. The solid green line was our original budgeted revenue of $21.7 million, and our original budgeted expenses is a solid red line at about $18.6 million, with a budgeted surplus of roughly $3 million at year end. When COVID hit and we had to redo our projections, we have the green dotted line, which show projections, and these were meant to be worst case scenario of our final revenue of being $15.5 million versus the red dotted line coming in at $13.7 million. Our projected expenses with a surplus of roughly $1.8 million. So the net difference between our original budget and the projections shortened our surplus by about $1.2 million. Then we went back and we have been tracking actual. So we have our green dashed line for revenues, and at the end of September, you can see it at $13.3 million versus the projected revenue of about $12.39 million. And so we have a surplus there of $1 million versus our actual versus our projection. And then we look at the expenses, which is this red dashed line, which are at just about $9.5 million at the end of September versus our red dotted line of projected expenses of $10 million for the end of September, showing our expenses being down by about $500,000. And so overall, that puts us at about $1.5 million above where our original projections were showing us to be. So that looks very good. We'll go on to our next slide now, which is the recreation fund, and it has the same setup. It has the solid green line, which was our original budgeted revenues of $10.5 million. And the solid red line of our original budget expenses of almost $13 million. So we were showing a deficit of roughly $2.5 million based on the budget. We went back and we did our projections. And so on this green dotted line, you can see that our projected revenues were at $5 million. And on the red dotted line, you can see the projected expenses at about $8.8 million with a projected deficit of about $3.7 million. So the difference between the original budgeted deficits and the projected deficit is a difference of about $1.3 million. And the projections were meant to be worst case scenario. We went back and started tracking then our actuals to projections, and the actuals are in this green dashed line. We can see at the end of September, we're at about almost $5 million in revenues versus $4 million in revenues. So actually we're up about $818,000 over our projections. And then as far as expenses, we can see the red dashed line. We're coming in, our expenses are at about $6.5 million. Our projected expenses were at about $6.5 million. So that's really pretty much spot on. So overall, at this point, at the end of September, our difference between our actual and our projections is a positive of about $777,000.
I have a question there.
Oh,
Is that,
yes.
let's go back to, so does that show that basically our expenses, we've cut our expenses $3.5 million year to date from 10 to 6.53?
Yeah, from the original budget, yes, we have. Yes.
And can you go back to the last slide? I just want to see what that number is.
Sure.
So in the last slide, our expenses are, so there's two solid lines. Okay,
So-
the bottom one is the projected after COVID.
The projected is the dotted, actual is dashed, and then the solid was the original budget.
So we, in the operations, we've cut over four, is it about 4.5, actually more, almost $4.75 million worth of expenses?
Yes, yeah.
And what, and where did we, where's that, those 4 million, where's that coming from? Or what did we cut to achieve that difference?
Well, we definitely have payroll that we have saved, which we'll look at, when we look at the original budget versus our projection. We have $2.5 million of payroll savings projected by the end of the year. And then of course we, things are being closed down. Utilities are quite expensive. And so we saved a lot there. Just different expenses associated with, sadly, all the, services and programs that we had to cancel. Special events are rather expensive, and the bulk of those were canceled. I would say there's a whole host of things that kind of add up to that, but payroll is definitely a big one.
Okay. Let me pause there and ask if my fellow board members here have any questions or comments. Hearing none, let's move on. Thank you.
Okay, so here's the payroll slide. And so as we were just talking about, we did have our original budget for payroll at year end was $10 million. You can see it at the end of September, it would have been about $7.3 million. When we went back through and did our projections for COVID, that's this blue line showing us with projected salaries at the end of the year of $7.5 million. To come up with this $2.5 million difference, we did have hiring freeze, we had wage freeze, we furloughed staff, we did not fill any open positions. Then we went back and we did a plot through on this yellow line what our actual payroll was. And if you recall back in July, our payroll expense did start to slightly exceed our projections. And you can see at the end of September that we are still slightly above what our projections were for payroll to the tune of about $132,000. When we look at that number, just individually, it probably doesn't look good. But if you go back and you look at the $777,000 surplus in rec and the $1.5 million surplus in operations, we could not have provided the amount of programming and services to the community without having added some extra heads to payroll. Definitely with what we do, we need people to run our programs for us. So again, while this slide on its own may not look as good as you want it to, it definitely makes sense when you look at how good things are looking over in operations. I also want to draw your attention then to the bottom too. We had tracked each payroll down here. And you can see that when the pandemic hit here in March, that the payroll did start dropping off again as we furloughed and froze salaries and stopped hiring. It did pick up back again then in July when we started to, I guess, get our sea legs back, right? We opened back up. We started going through the phases. We started figuring out which of our programs and services were making sense, what was the community happy to participate in, and then they were staffed accordingly. You can see now since this high in July, that third payroll, our payroll costs have come down in August and they continue to come down in September. And now we're going to look at this next slide.
Wait, hold on 1 second. Sorry. Hello?
Yep.
Go ahead, Terry.
Sorry, there was just a lot of noise for a second. Did you end up going back? This is the same chart we were just looking at, right?
Yes.
So July is when we started opening things up again. And then you said something about that even though they were up and you met the needs of opening up with payroll, things have gone well in that period though, right? We've kept expenses down while revenue has gone up.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, then we were asked to look at payroll a little bit more closely. And so that is what we did. And in this slide, this is a new slide. This red line on the bottom represents year-to-date recreation, part-time and seasonal payroll. So just again, to kind of get a feel for some of the payroll costs included in that slide that we just looked at. And then we compared that against our recreation year-to-date revenues, excluding taxes. And we were looking for some sort of a correlation. And you can see, I mean, I would say there is definitely a correlation. Probably the biggest correlation is, again, as we start figuring out what kind of programs or services we can offer to the public that they are interested in. We definitely expound on those. And, we're able to do it, once we figure out what we're doing, it's taking us less staff to get that done. You can see at the beginning, the ratio is kind of high at 34%, but it's definitely leveling out at about a 25 or 26% ratio of this, part-time and seasonal staff and helping us to achieve these revenues in the rec fund. So
this is a new slide, so let's see if there's anybody who has any questions or comments.
Okay.
Anybody?
Is this sort of saying, I was trying to follow because I was going to ask a question and then it sounded like you hit on some of the terms I was asking. Is this sort of saying like the revenue per person working somewhere? Is that sort of what we're talking about?
It would be the revenue per part-time or seasonal payroll. But these are the kind of people that, right, they come and they lifeguard, right? We have to hire a lot of extra lifeguards in the summer, say. So this would be, those kind of staff. So, investing in lifeguards, we can have more people coming to the beach, or more staff for camps, and we would have more camp revenue,
right?
Or, so on and so forth.
So even though they are both going up, obviously the space between the two lines is growing, and that's positive.
Right. Absolutely.
And is this what we see? Is the normal ratio much closer together, I guess, if it was a normal year, or is this a ratio that we should expect to see when camp is humming and ice skating's humming or whatever?
My guess is, and we have not, to my knowledge, no one has gone back and dissected that data, like from a regular year. My guess is we were more labor intensive this year because you had to separate the kids more. So we needed to have more personnel versus, this group of kids, right? We couldn't have as many kids like in one classroom or one camp. We had to split them up more. So I would say this is higher than it probably normally would be.
So if I could follow up on that, we right now we're at a 25% ratio versus the beginning 34% ratio, meaning that we're generating more income per employee.
Yes, yes, I would say absolutely. As we're figuring out things along the way, I think we're doing it more efficiently. And, I know is certain programs we're filling up. Well, you know what? We just added another one right after it. And so you could still utilize, your staff.
And I think I derived from this that, and the comment made about we had to have more staff to maintain a lower staff to participant ratio, that this is something that we should focus on going forward, because we are able to generate a very good ratio, meaning fewer staff, and we generate good income from it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
And this is a hallmark or a benchmark that we should probably emboss into our memory banks.
Hey, anybody else? I have a question. This is with regard to the revenues from the rec fund, correct?
Yes.
But this is only the expenses with regard to part-time and seasonal payroll. So the regular payroll, the full-time, is not figured in here. So the question are our regular payroll employees, are they doing more in order to keep the necessity of hiring more part-time and seasonal employees less, so that number that red line can stay somewhat flat, while the green line seems to be, I'm going to use the word spiking, but going and increasing? Could that be attributed to our full-time employees actually doing more and picking up the slack?
Well, definitely some of our full-time staff were reallocated into other areas. And I know that from doing our CARES Act filing. So we definitely have had full-time staff doing things that they would not traditionally be doing. So, I would say that's a fair statement. I don't have, any succinct data to give that to. We were tracking time, many of us, if we were doing things that, were out of the ordinary for our position. We needed to track that for one of our CARES Act filings. But I don't have that such, data that I.
So if you go back to the previous slide, which is the payroll, this is the monthly payroll, and the monthly payroll is both seasonal and full-time, correct?
Right, it's all payroll.
And so what I don't understand is what's the value of the next slide, which is just the seasonal, because we're including all the revenue from the district, but only a portion of the payroll. So I don't know what the value of that slide is.
So, go on.
I was going to say, this is only showing the revenue from recreation. So therefore, we're showing the correlation between the revenue from recreation and how payroll is changing in relation to revenue from recreation. If we were to include full-time staff, it would not change anything, because full-time staff, since the furloughs had been made, et cetera, has not really changed a lot. I mean, certainly we furloughed staff, and some staff are no longer working for the district, but it's not correlated to recreation revenue. Those decisions were made for different reasons. So,
but do we have any full-time employees that are just? By the way, whoever's if you mute if you're not talking, please. Thank you. With regard to the rec fund, we have full-time employees that are allocated towards that fund that are not captured in this slide. Is that correct?
Yes, and the reason that they're not captured in the slide is because that payroll hasn't changed based on the recreation revenue. So this was based on what was requested to show the correlation between the increase in revenue and the increase in expense. There has been no increase in administrative staff. There's only been a decrease in administrative staff.
I mean, maybe I'm not understanding this because I mean, if we're trying to, it depends on what we're trying to use this for. If we're trying to track our payroll that is attributed to rec, I think we need to include our whoever is in full-time in rec, because I don't know how many full-time employees we have allocated to the rec fund. So I think that because that could be fluctuating too. We could have less people or we could have more people full-time in there. I think that for this, again, I don't know what we're trying to accomplish by this slide. I don't remember requesting it, but I just don't understand what we're doing if we're not including the full-time staff that's allocated to the rec fund.
Actually, someone did request this, and I don't remember who, but I did have it in my notes that someone had requested to look at this. I think they just wanted to see if there was some kind of a correlation. So
I think the question may have been misquoted or misstated. I think what we've reduced staff, we've reallocated staff, and I think the question was to show if there's a positive effect on revenue by having lower staff numbers. And it's like, use the drawing crayon and show us the line where that might be. And would we be seeing a similar, I think a comment was made, would we be seeing a similar track line showing that as we've reduced permanent staff, the ratio is tracking somewhat closely to the 34 down to 25%, basically because, as a comment was made, we have fewer full-time staff and they may be producing more.
well, go on, Brian. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly show whatever, data the board would like to see. It's, there are certainly some intuitive conclusions that are being drawn from this graph right here that I would say staff would have to go back and probably validate if those conclusions are probably accurate. And I'm not really sure that these graphs, this particular graph, the ratio of revenue to payroll is going to tell a story other than what you're going to see in recreation is as revenue increases, you're going to see payroll increase because the more services we offer, the more staff it requires to run those services. And that's directly related to recreation, part-time seasonal staff. The full-time staff, again, it's pretty consistent, but you could see a correlation in increased net revenue because you'd be decreasing in expense, but I don't know that you could make an assumption that by decreasing staff, you're going to increase revenue. I don't think that would make.
Well, this is showing that.
This is only showing the part-time staff.
I realize that, but this is showing that.
Here's the thing. Again, I'm not fully understanding the value of this slide, and I don't want to take up more time. Mary Lynn, if you want to spend some time with me offline, if you think you want to use this moving forward, include it within your presentations, I'll make myself available. You just let me know. Again, if you're going to continue to use the slide, because I'm still struggling with what the value of this slide is. So I'd like to move on because I don't want to spend too much time on this. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Next slide.
Okay, that's the end of this presentation. And
that was easy.
Yes, it was. I don't know if anyone has any questions or not, but if we can.
I'll answer my paragraph.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? Yes, let me get to that. Okay, so this time, what I'd like to do is go back to our original slide for operations. I think if we look to what happened originally at the beginning of the year before the COVID hit, our revenues were right on track with budget and our expenses were looking wonderful too. Then in March, we can see the bottom fell out when COVID hit and we closed down, and our revenues, the dotted line fell off from the solid revenue line, and our expenses dropped too, of course, because we were closed. But once we kind of regained our footing and we were able to start opening, you can definitely see then our actual revenues picking up, over our projections. Of course, not catching up to the original budget, but not bad. And our actual expenses were coming in lower than what was projected. When we get over to September, and can you see my arrow or no?
Yes.
You can. Okay. So when we get to September, really we look good, right? We're at $1.5 million more than we projected we thought we would be at this point. However, if anyone has picked up their phone or watched the news, or as some people were talking before the meeting started, COVID is starting to come back. And, what is that going to do to us out here? We did run those projections a while ago. What would happen if we closed November, December? I think our thinking at this point, we have the surplus so far. And if things do start going south, I think we have now the history of getting to phase 4, knowing what kind of program we can do if we do have to scale back a little bit. I don't expect that our revenues to be what we were projecting them to be, but I don't think we would be, a lost cause either. Now, of course, we can't control if we're completely shut down again and we have to go back to, everything virtual. And of course, the other open item out there is just how does the community feel about still coming and interacting in our classes and utilizing our facilities. So the future is a little murky to me right now, but I think we're in a good place right now, at the end of September.
Okay, so here's before I turn it over to my fellow board members, I will say this. I mean, obviously, I'm a news junkie, and I've been following, and a lot of the scientists are saying that the next 6 to 12 weeks could be the toughest weeks of the pandemic. So the next time you make this presentation, we're 4 weeks into that 6 to 12 week possible tough increase or spike. So, obviously, when you make your next presentation a month from now, keep that in mind. And also, hopefully, we'll see if they're right, and we'll be able to plan accordingly for the remaining of the year and the first quarter of next year.
Right.
So at this point, I'll turn it over to my fellow board members, see if they have any questions or comments. Hearing none, let's move on.
Okay. All right. So next, we're gonna look at our tax levy. Okay. Are you seeing the tax levy on your screen?
Yes, we are.
2020. Okay.
Yes, we are.
Okay. All right. And you're seeing my cursor on the screen too?
Nope.
You don't see my cursor.
I see my cursor.
Oh, you do. Okay.
No. Cal, I think, said he sees his cursor.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, not my cursor.
No. And I also, and by the way,
I see it now.
There.
Yeah, there it is.
I also see two screens at one time.
So Mary Lynn, if you go into where it says display settings up top, do you on your screen that click on that and then swap presenter view to slideshow.
Okay.
That's what we want to see right there.
Okay. You know what, boy, did you not have my cursor for the last presentation?
No, we did. We're good.
Oh, you did. Okay.
I think, but
okay. All right. Do you see my cursor now on the roof of Westridge?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay. Excellent. All righty. Okay. So
again, just if we're not talking, could you please mute your device? Thank you.
Okay. All right. This is our proposed presentation for the workshop meeting in November. Our intentions today are to give the board information relevant to determining the 2020 tax levy. We will be showing our tax schedule. We're going to do a brief tax refresher. We're going to look at actual prior and future projected data given different scenarios. We're going to look at short-term and long-term capital needs, as well as short-term and long-term funding models. We're going to get an understanding of a tax bill. And then finally, we're going to have an understanding of our truth in taxation calculation.
Okay, Marilyn, are you also going to include a survey of other park districts you
know what, I have that too. Just
you have that too?
Remind me at the end. I do have, well, you know what, I can just, well, yeah, we'll do that at the end. I'll interject it at some point, but yeah.
Okay, just so we're budgeting, it seems like you got a lot that you're going to present. Do you have any idea how long this is all going to take?
And I think it depends how much discussion we have.
Okay, well, we'll try to hold the discussion, but at least questions. But do you have a ballpark?
say 30 minutes.
Okay, great. All right, let's go.
Okay. All right. So here is our tax levy timeline. We kind of dissected this out of our original overall timeline. So you can see we're here today, October 22nd, looking at our tax levy and our truth in taxation. If need be, we can revisit this again at the November 5th Finance Committee meeting. Then on November 10th, we have our workshop meeting with our truth in taxation resolution. And then at the 17th, November 17th board meeting, we would pass our truth in taxation resolution. Then in December, at the December 8th workshop, of course, our resolution will then be worked into our tax levy ordinance. And then on December 17th at that board meeting, we would pass the tax levy ordinance, and then it has to be filed with the county by the last Tuesday in December, which is December 28th. Okay, we looked at this the last time we looked at taxes back in August. At that time, we had our actual for the year ended 12/31/2019. And we could see that our operating revenue made up 45% of our revenue, and our tax revenues made up 53% of our revenue. We actually fished back to 2011, 2012, and believe it or not, this ratio of about 50-50 was about 50-50 back then too. So, you know, pretty level over the past 10 years, our breakdown between operating revenue and tax revenues. However, in 2020, we got the COVID. And so, you know, not only did we have to close down and we had to greatly reduce what we've been up to as far as operations, as of September 30th, our operating revenue is at 35% of our revenue, and our tax revenues are at 65%. We do anticipate that this ratio is going to grow even larger on the tax revenue side to as high as 70 to 75%, depending on what's going to happen this last quarter. And so, of course, that would equate to operations going down to 30 or 25%. And why is this data important? Because the operating funds feed our capital budget, which is something very important for the Park District, and we're going to go over that in a few minutes. Okay, now we're going to have a tax refresher. So first, funding. Property taxes provide critical funding, which we just said is currently at 65% of our funding to support the Park District's mission to maintain the community assets. And so we have our asset management, which supports repair and replacement of our $68 million of insured assets that we have across all of our facilities. We have our parks and properties. So it helps to support the general fund's operation maintenance of 45 parks for lakefront properties, nearly 800 acres of open space, and 11 facilities. Our funding also provides for our capital projects. It supports the recreation funds transfer to capital, for capital maintenance, which are our tier 1 through 3 items, and for our capital improvement projects, which are our tier 4 and 5 items. And right now, which you have seen previously, and we'll look at in a few minutes, we have over $30 million sitting in our 5-year plan for capital projects. Now we'll talk about the Park District tax cap law. It is important that we remember that the Park District has a tax cap. And so when you try to compare the Park District to other government entities, such as maybe like a city or municipality, most cities do not have a tax cap. And so they are not limited in what they tax. And so what they tax this year doesn't really necessarily what they are able to tax the following year, which is different than what the Park District has. And I think, Cal, I'll just throw it out right now. We did reach out to all park districts in Lake County and all park districts in NSSRA, and there's a little bit of overlap there. 15 of them did get back to us on what they plan on doing this year. And so as far as their levying, what they're going to do, we have the option, just like the rest of those other 15 park districts, to increase our taxes by CPI, which is 2.3% or 5%, whichever is lower. And we were informed by the 15 park districts that responded that all are levying the 2.3% CPI. Additionally, we have the ability to tax for new growth, which would be new property that has been built, or additions or tear downs. Again, the 15 park districts that replied back to us so far are all taxing for new growth this year, or levying for new growth this year as well. So everyone around us is going after the CPI increase and the new growth increase.
Marilyn, did anyone give you a reason, or was there a consensus reason why they're all seeking the CPI and the new growth increase?
I actually had a slide with some of their quotes, but I took it out. I didn't ask them. I didn't give their quotes, but really overwhelmingly they said, you know, the risk of hurting taxes in the future, right? Because if you don't levy this year, then you lose that money forever, and sort of the compounding amount on top of that year after year you lose. And when we do have a slide, and we looked at it last time, when we had done that over a 10-year span, we left over $10 million on the table. So it adds up, it compounds very quickly. And it's using the CPI is meant to protect everyone in good economic times and bad. So in 2019, the economy was good and the CPI ended at 2.3%, and that's why we get to levy that this year. Next year, at the end of 2021, we know last time we discussed taxes in August, the CPI was at 0.7%, largely due to the pandemic. Last month, it was at 1.3%. The trend, they're expecting it to go down if COVID continues to get worse. And so ending the year with a very low CPI will be reflected, in next year's taxes. So when we did the levy next year, and if we levy the CPI and say it is only 0.7%, that is a substantially smaller increase in our taxes than what we could levy this year.
Can I jump in for a second?
Sorry.
Thank you. For me, it's a much more compelling reason to do this, because I was talking to Brian Romes earlier today, and when we first talked about this, I was sort of leaning right on this, that, hey, we really don't need to do this. I just didn't feel a strong reason why we had to do it. But the more compelling reason for me is the situation we're in right now that goes back to that last chart of the imbalance between taxes and operations, that we're going to need that money, I believe, to maintain the district's mission of, the community assets. That if we don't have that coming in, the few things that are available to our citizens include some of our beaches and our parks and things like that. And if we can't maintain those, then we're just, even if somebody has to pay a little bit extra in their tax bill, which I'm not exactly sure how that works, in my mind, I feel like this is the time where most residents would support us doing that, rather than us having to close them or reduce, really reduce staffing for them and things like that. That's just my opinion. I think a more substantive is where we are right now than how this affects us 10 years down the line. That's just me.
Okay. Before we get into this discussion of whether with regard to whether we should max out our levy with the CPI or new growth, I think that's, again, a very valuable discussion, but I'd like to hear the presentation, because I don't even know, what else she's got in there. I mean, she's got 28 more minutes to go through this. So,
Okay.
So let's move on.
Okay. All right. Remember that the levy is requested in September to the county. However, the final finalizing the EAVs by the county does not happen until next spring. The EAV is the equalized assessed value of property, and that is really constantly changing. And so we do have a certified letter from the county dated September 26th, and that's the last we will see until we get our final EAV number in the spring. So when you do request the levy, it's a little difficult because the numbers are changing, and you always want to make sure, of course, that you launch a full levy and don't come up short. So that's something else to keep in mind too. The district will receive the amount that we levy unless we reach our cap limit. If we exceed the cap limit with our levy, then we will only get the allowed cap amount that we could get. And then finally, as far as our taxes, it is important to keep in mind the pandemic and the elongation of due dates that were issued by Lake County this year, it causes our collection of taxes to be deferred. And so while we normally collect roughly 99% of our taxes in any given year, we did project that to be 94% for this year because we realized that, sadly, businesses have closed, people are struggling, so their taxes are not necessarily getting paid when they should be. And, as we all know, in the Friday memo that went out, I think last week or the week before, as of really today, our tax collection's at about 90% so far only. So things are coming in slower, definitely. And we do have that final due date, November 8th. And so we hope to, collect another nice chunk in November, but we'll wait and see. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our tax levy considerations. Uncollected tax revenue cannot be recaptured in future years. So I think we already touched upon that. If we don't get it this year, then it's gone. Increasing the levy by the CPI new growth avoids negative impact on all future levies and long-term funding for capital repair and replacement. Because if we are bringing in less money, and we'll have a different slide in a few minutes, where operating expenses do continue to increase. And so as Terry said, and he's so spot on, we have very limited ways to bring in revenue to the park district. And obviously, as you saw by the one slide right now, our tax levy is really the largest part of our revenue coming in. The tax cut limits the district's ability to keep up with inflation. The district would be giving up necessary revenue without an alternative source to replace it, which will have a compounding negative impact on the district's ability to maintain community infrastructure, resources, services, and amenities. Not levying the allowable increase will decrease the district fund reserves, which could have a negative effect on our district's AAA bond rating, thus costing the district more money when we go out to borrow, and really not being good stewards of community assets. And finally, it is important to keep in mind that if for some reason, we change our mind and next year we feel like, we have too much money, we shouldn't have done a full levy, it can always be rebated back at a later date.
Questions, comments? Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Okay. All right, we saw this slide back in August. And if you recall, back in 2010 and 2011, we did in fact freeze taxes. And so you can see how that affects over time the lost money that was left on the table over the past 10 years. And so when we look at this slide, we do want to remember 10 years ago when we froze taxes, we had $25 million in reserves. That was at the end of 2011. That was our largest reserve in that 10-year period. Versus the end of 2020, this year, we project having $15 million in reserves. But it's important to remember that roughly $5 million of that is the bond issuance that we had earlier this year, and we have to spend that money really by the end of next year on capital projects. There was no board approved capital plan back in 2010 and 2011. And while we definitely saved the taxpayers money over the past 10 years by having frozen the taxes, the net effect to the district was this $11.6 million, which has resulted in numerous unfunded green print projects, deferred maintenance, and really, I would say less than desirable fund balances. We also have a larger capital budget currently at $30 million than we had back in 2010. And also in that time frame, we have acquired roughly 100 acres of new property that we are currently redeveloping and will need to maintain into the future. Hi. Now we're going
Is that new property, the preserve?
Yes.
Okay.
So now we are going to look at what freezing the property taxes would do to us going forward. And we looked at this last time. However, we have changed our assumptions somewhat. The data available to us, the closer we get to the end of the year, we have better data to base our assumptions on. And so our change in assumptions have caused a larger variance in our cumulative dollars that we would anticipate that would be left on the table if we did freeze taxes at the end of this year. What we showed last time was really a worst case scenario as far as revenue loss. This time around, we're going to go more conservative. Again, we have better data. We worked with PMA on some of the data we're using there now, and it's just based on what our most recent data is. EAV growth has changed. The new construction figure has changed. Of course, CPI, is always a guess going out, but we try to make the best estimated guess we can. And so we'll take a look at that. So this is what we are showing. This would be us here in 2020. So if we froze our taxes, they would stay at about 10.9 million versus gathering the 11.2 million that we would get from the CPI increase. And then year over year, and this is excluding the 11 million we showed on the other slide, because really, if you drop that in here too, the cumulative effect, of course, would be much greater. My understanding was when we did freeze back in 2010, 2011, that the estimate had been about a $10 million cumulative dollars left on the table. And obviously it came in larger than that. You had some very prosperous years over the past 10 years with very significant CPIs. We don't know going forward what our CPIs are going to be. So we went kind of conservative with a 1.3 and a 2% to come up with this number. We also want to keep in mind that while I feel like I've heard about it less in this year's election, but previously, and certainly a topic of conversation down in Springfield, is Springfield freezing taxes. And so, it's very possible that the legislator may decide to freeze taxes next year or sometime in the future that we would have no control over. It's also important to remember that, the CPI, the economy, they affect these numbers we use up here for our CPI, and they, anticipate, they help us anticipate increases and decreases that we would have in our levy, but it's certainly hard to predict those, many years out. And also elections and pandemics, of course, can affect what the CPI is going to be.
Questions, comments at this point? Okay, let's move on.
Okay. So then what we wanted to do is just look at some specific costs that we have here at the district that we really don't have a lot of control over. And so the one we're going to show you, and we have other examples, but I know this is a pretty long presentation, so we're just going to go look at one, computer and software expense. And we're going to look at it over the past 4 years. You can see what we spent 2015 on computer and software at the district, 96,000. Then we spent 164,000 in 2016. Then it jumped again in 2017, 2018, 2019. And so you can see that total expense increase from 2015 to 2019 was roughly 175% versus the CPI increase over that same point in time was 6.8%. So even just levying the CPI increase does not cover specific line item expense categories that we don't have a lot of control over. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're deciding on what you want to do with your tax levy. We also want you to keep in mind that we do have this 5-year capital plan that totals $30 million. And so we want to make sure that at the end of the day, at the end of the year, really, when we go to make our transfers into the capital fund, that we do have money left over in the recreation fund. And again, as we saw earlier, a large amount of our funding, especially during this year, is coming from property taxes. And I would, bet that's probably going to continue into next year with, what is going on with the pandemic currently.
Questions, comments? Anybody have questions or comments? Great.
Okay. So on this page, we have our funding model, which ties to the schedule we just showed you. And that 2019 ending balance at $7.1 million is from our audited CAFR. And of course, we issued the bonds earlier this year. We have, scaled back and gone conservative with this. We were trying to show a worst case scenario here. So we are only presently anticipating transferring $1 million from the recreation fund to the capital fund at the end of the year, and then another $450,000 from the special rec fund. And then our capital project spend estimate for this year is at $4.6 million, which would leave us with a capital fund balance of $11 million. And this, just trickles forward every year based on what we have in that capital plan and based on, just a worst case scenario as far as transfers from recreation and special rec. And you can see.
I have a question, Mary Lynn.
Yeah.
These capital project lines, are those tier 1 through tier 3 projects, or is that
Yes.
all?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, you are right. This chart is spending tiers 1 through 3 maintaining. It is only maintaining projects, maintaining.
So if you go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
So that's the $25.5 million figure over the next 5 years.
Yes.
And so the tier 4 and tier 5 is the 5.3. So that's not funded in that funding model.
That's right. That's
and
right.
what and are the green print projects like Centennial and potentially West Ridge, are they included in these tier 1 through tier 5s, or are they excluded?
West Ridge is excluded except for some maintenance here and there to keep it going, but not like a replacement of it. That is not in here. As far as exactly from Centennial, I might have to defer to Director Romes or Director Smith on that. I know there are some.
Tier 1 through 3. Yeah. Centennial is.
So the green print plan for Centennial is included in the tier 1 to tier 3.
Correct.
So that's included in that $25.5 million figure.
Correct.
Okay, so forward it to the next slide.
All right.
So this is showing funding year model CPI increases on tax. This is assuming that we levy the CPI increase and we levy new growth. In 2025, the ending balance in our capital fund will be 2.1 million.
Yes, and that includes a bond issuance of $5 million in 2024.
Okay, and so what would that number be in 2025, or any of these numbers? Do we have a funding model showing if we don't increase the CPI? What would that do to these numbers?
Yes, we do. It's about 2 slides away.
Okay, all right. So not that I always like to read the last page of the book before.
I know.
Okay.
I know it's not going to look as good as this, but yes.
Okay, all right. Any questions or comments before we get to those slides?
Marilyn, you just want to point out 2023 though?
I did. That's what I was going to say. I just wanted to point out one other thing. So let's make this very clear. This 2024 bond issue of $5 million I have discussed with PMA, and this is really the earliest we could do some sort of bonding. So, we really have to hold our own these few years until, it's time that we can issue bonds again. And so if you look at 2023, this is really cutting it close. And this would assume that, the numbers that we have in the capital projects plan are accurate, because of course, over time, I don't know what the future holds. Certain materials may become much more expensive. We could have inflation that would cause those project costs to go up. You just don't know. So this is cutting it pretty close.
So these capital projects, these tier 1 through tier 3, this is the capital plan that we've seen several times that Director Smith has presented to the board, correct?
Yes.
So we've gone through. Okay, I want to answer that. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Okay. All right, so this slide is very similar to the last. This does include the CPI increase on tax cap funds as well as new construction. However, this is spending of all tiers 1 through 5, maintaining and improving. Same scenario. We have last year's ending fund capital fund balance, our bonds from this year, same transfer from the rec fund and the special rec fund, same capital projects, except it's all 5 tiers. This one doesn't look as good. This shows us really running out of money in 2022 without being able to issue bonds until 2024. So,
and this does not include West Ridge. This does not include the implementing the athletic field master plan or any of that, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Executive Director.
Well, so this would include some aspects in the athletic field management strategy, but it would not include things such as artificial turf. But it would include some things like the the light replacements and things like that have been identified in the capital plan. But many of those, such as drainage, are tier 4 and 5. So they're in here, but not like the turf, which I know is a green print identified project.
Okay. Questions, comments, anybody? Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Okay. So now we are going to show this with no increase on our tax cap fund. So in essence, freezing our property taxes this year for our tiers 1 through 3. And so what we think is the most appropriate in what we have done is, reducing then what our transfer from the recreation fund would be. We showed it as $1 million on the previous slide, but we reduced it because we know we would have less money coming in. And so, we have reflected those transfers appropriately from the recreation fund with the reduced funding coming through. And then again, this one now in 2022, while it's not in the red, it has a very small balance. And then in 2023, we would be in the red, and then patiently waiting for our bond issuance in 2024. And then even after that, those last 2 years, we would have very minimal balances in the capital projects fund. Okay, now we will look at the same thing, no increase. So,
Wait, Marilyn, can you take us back 2 slides? So I just look at these numbers versus the ones, not this one, the one before, the tier 1, 2, 3. So in 2025, if we do the CPI increase, we would have 2.1 million. And what's the number in?
It's like a couple 100,000. Let's see.
The next slide.
Yeah, it's 241,000.
Okay.
So it is a big difference.
Okay, next slide.
And so here again, we have no increase on tax cap funds, and this is spending all tiers, so maintaining and improving. And again, you can see we have reduced what we would anticipate the transfer from the rec fund, and we would again be in the red at 2022. And sadly, even with a bond issuance, we would still continue to be in the red.
Can you go back 2 slides now? See what how we can compare that. One more.
Yeah, I know this is not going so well. It would be at about a negative 3.2 million.
3.2 versus what was the other?
5. It's 5 something. Let's see. A 5.1.
Okay, got it.
Right.
Questions, comments? Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
Are you going to eventually present this to the board? Is that what the plan is?
That is the plan, yes.
I mean, if you somehow can do, maybe somehow do this so we could actually compare on one slide, with the CPI and without the CPI. I mean, it'd be helpful instead of having to go back and forth between slides.
I do have that slide. This was so long. Do you want me to pull that up? It's at the end of the slide deck. I could.
No, that's all right. It'd just be more helpful, so it's just easier for me.
Okay. No, I'll make sure to include that next time. We do have it. It was just we started cutting back on some of our slides.
Okay, great. Okay, next slide.
Director Rome's had her eliminate that slide.
Thanks for passing up.
Incorrectly. So my bad, Cal.
It doesn't mean I'm right. Okay, I have a second grade education, so Okay.
We were arm wrestling over that this morning. So
okay, all right. Next
All
one.
right. Now we are going to look at an actual property tax bill. And I just want to spend a few minutes so everyone's familiar. Probably all get your own property tax bills, but just a few things to note. So the fair market value, the average fair market value of a home in Highland Park is around $600,000. So this is pretty close to your average home in Highland Park. Okay. Here's our line item on this tax bill, the Park District of Highland Park. And we also have this pension line item, but we don't use any pension or anything. We just put in our one number here. We are roughly 7% of the entire property tax bill. And I think it's important for you to know, just when you're talking to your neighbors, your constituents, that almost everybody else on here gets 2 line items. We can see The County of Lake has 2 line items. School District 112 has 2 line items. School District 113 has 2 line items. Granted, the second line item is almost always pension. And then we have the City of Highland Park. They have 3 line items. They have their pension, the library, and theirs. And so, you know, when you want to compare what part of the property tax bill we are, you know, here's our rate, this 559. But if you go, like, say, to the city and add up their 3 numbers, they're at a 0.856. So they, you know, are a larger portion of the bill. And then, of course, your school districts are very large. They always are. Your District 112 is at a 3.0 level. And then your District 113 is at over a 2 point. It's about a 2.28 level. So that is just something to, you know, just, I guess, kind of keep in your back pocket if you're talking taxes with any of your neighbors. We are, again, we are 7% of the bill compared to some of these other entities. But let's look at what this would mean for our John Doe taxpayer. So if we increase the 2020 tax levy by CPI, the 2.3% from last year to this year, the result in the tax bill for this $615,000 home, which, so again, this is an average value home in Highland Park, this home would have their taxes not increased by $25.97. So that is the amount more he would pay on that bill we just looked at if we do levy our full 2.3%. And that is an annual amount. So it'd be $26, it would be $13 on each of the 2 tax bills. Now, of course, it assumes that this person's EAV stays the same, right? If their EAV changes, then their amount would change. But if everything, you know, stayed the same, this is what the effect of our
Marilyn, it's also important to know that $615,000 fair market value is what the assessor believes your fair market value. It could be more, it could be less actually, but that's
absolutely.
what the assessor, that's how the assessor views it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's a good point. Thank you, Kel. Yes, that's absolutely correct. And then the effect to the district, however, for the 1 year would be roughly $300,000, or as we showed in our very conservative projections over the next 10 years, it would be $3.2 million to the Park District. Again, with the historical data, the 10 years before where we had the tax freeze, it really added up to like $10 million. But you know, this is a conservative number. I don't want to blow things out of proportion, but that is what we want to let you know, the dollars we're talking about here to individuals and then to the Park District. So next, we put together our truth in taxation amounts. And so the factors we used the CPI, which is 2.3%, which is allowable. That's for the levy year 2020. The EAV in Highland Park is negative. However, based on consultations with our financial advisor, PMA, we are going to use a 0% change in EAV. And then finally, our new growth estimate amount from the county as of September 26th, they came in at $16 million. And what we did is we went back, we looked at the past 2 years of what the county gave us at the end of September versus where it really ends up at year end. And they tend to be a little on the low side, but that's understandable because of course new property keeps coming in the books on the fourth quarter. And so after discussions with PMA, our financial advisor, we're going to use a $25 million number for our new property amount. And so what this turns into is our truth in taxation calculation. And we have had this reviewed by our financial advisor as well as legal, just as far as the verbiage in the final truth in taxation document. But basically, this shows us for the general fund, what we were awarded by the county. Remember, we issue a tax levy. If we exceed our tax cap, it will be reduced back to the tax cap and not over it. And that amount is called the extension. You always want to cast your levy net greater than what you think things will come in at, because you don't want to leave any money on the table. And so our extension, what we were awarded by the county in 2020 was $5.5 million for the general fund. And then the rec fund, we got $5.2 million. And then our special recreation fund, which is really a total different entity, it's 0.04% of the EAV. They came in at $953,000. And so here was our total tax extension excluding debt service in 2020. And again, keep in mind, we're at about 90% collection on that as of today. Then what we are proposing for next year, our levy that we would file in December, that last Tuesday in December, we would go after $5.7 million for the general fund. We would ask for $5.4 million in the recreation fund, and we would ask for $975,000 for the special recreation fund, for a grand total of just over $12 million. And so you can see the increase in each of our funds, that's 2.3% plus a new construction would get us. So in total, it would increase our revenue by $432,000. And so the bottom line, the reason we have to do a truth in taxation is this percentage right here. And this percentage is called your truth in taxation percent. It reflects the absolute increase that we are asking for in taxes. So this has our 2.3% CPI, and then the amount above the 2.3% is our new growth. And so this has to be reported. You will be signing, you'll be passing an ordinance in December that says this is how much we propose to raise taxes by. If this amount exceeds 5%, you have to have a public hearing. And since it is less than 5%, we would not have to have a public hearing.
Mary Lynn, is this including the CPI and the new growth increase, yes, or is this including it?
Yes, it is.
Now, do you have one of these without the
yes,
CPI?
Yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So here, this one is with a tax freeze. And so again, our extension, whoops. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Our extension stays the same for this year, obviously. But what would happen then for our levy this year, we're not going to go after that 2.3% CPI in the scenario. We would only go after new construction. That's very important that we don't miss that ever. So with the new construction, that's it ups our levy by about $58,000 for the general fund. For the rec fund, it increases it by about $55,000. And then it doesn't have any effect on special rec because again, that's just 0.04% of where the EAVs end up. And so when all is said and done, if we were not to go ahead and charge the 2.3 CPI percent, our truth in taxation percentage would be an increase in overall property taxes by 1.15%.
I have to ask a question. I'm a little bit confused. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm a homeowner.
Yes.
And I will go back to the previous page where I was paying $1,128 in taxes.
Okay. I'm getting us there. Hold on. I'm sorry.
Well, you really don't need to. I guess.
Oh, okay.
And at that point, we said if you take it at 2.3%, it's $25.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is the effect of putting on the screen the 1.15 and the 3.68 on the prior page?
So, okay. So 2.3% is CPI, but also in these numbers is the new growth.
So, but Marilyn, let me focus again. I'm a homeowner at a $615,000 house.
Mm-hmm.
How does new growth affect my bill?
It doesn't affect it at all. You're only going to be 2.3%.
All right. Now that's very significant to me.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm not saying I'm agreeing with this because
Mm-hmm.
my exposition about this.
Yes.
But I think we at one point are saying 3.68%. We're saying 2.3%. And if there's a third party looking at this, they're going to get very confused as to what we're really saying.
Yes. Yes. I completely agree. I think the way this all shakes out is very confusing. Legally, this is what we have to show. This is what is the, truth in taxation. And it's the way it has to be done.
No, I accept that. But I think I'm going to keep going back to this. It's a 2.3% increase.
Absolutely. If your EAV stays the same.
Right. We don't control, as Cal
right.
pointed out, we do not control the EAV.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Is there anything else?
Okay, we'll move on. And this is what our truth in taxation resolution will look like, which will be presented at the workshop meeting in November. It says what the extension was last year. It says what our levy would be this year. And then it shows in this, Barney, maybe to your question, if someone were to actually read our resolution, you can see the aggregate levy is going up by 2.3%. And then if you add anticipated growth, which would be the new construction, it would be 3.68%.
Yeah, and again, as we're saying, the new growth does not affect the homeowner.
Not an existing homeowner, no, just new properties, or if you had a, a room extension or a tear down.
Yes.
Like that.
Okay, thank you.
So in summary, staff is recommending that the tax levy be allowed to increase by the allowable amount in order to be good stewards of our community's park district assets.
Okay, before I turn it over to the board members for questions and comments, I do have one question. I know that it was brought up, I think, by Barney at the last meeting that he had a conversation with Nancy and she indicated that the city was not going to increase their levy for 2020. Were you able to look into that?
She's explained that. We understand.
Who's she?
She being Nancy, the woman you referred to.
Yes. What did she explain?
They are increasing taxes for pension, and I forgot what the other thing. And to make up for the loss, I'll finish my sentence. To make up for lost vehicle sticker fees.
Okay, I'm just asking if staff had a chance to check into it.
No, this was brought out to us when we talked yesterday at the intergovernmental meeting.
Okay, I still want to hear from staff. Thanks.
Okay, well, you can.
Okay. Go ahead, Marilyn.
So originally the press release, and I don't, want to act like an expert or thing, we did do a little bit of work on this, but the original press release said that they were going to have flat tax increase, I guess no increase, but they did issue then a clarifying press release. And so, yes, so my understanding, if we went back and looked at that tax bill, the one line item is the pension. My understanding is they're going, full levy on the pension amount. So it would be the 2.3% plus new construction. And then my further understanding is that they are going back to collect the money for the vehicle stickers that was not collected. And that comes to about $1.1 million. And furthermore, I understand that their truth in taxation amount will be 5.8%. And so they will have to have a public hearing on that. And that's just my understanding and interpretation. And I don't know, Executive Director Romes, if you have anything else you want to add to that, but
no, that is my understanding as well.
And again, we don't do this in a vacuum because we have sister governments. Have you heard anything from 112 and 113 with regard to what their intent is?
They'll be levying the full amount.
The 2.3% plus new construction?
Absolutely.
New development, okay.
But Moraine and Cal, Moraine Township is decreasing their levy.
Okay, well, I'm in West Deerfield. So I'll turn it over to, can you go back? What's the Moraine Township's percentage of the tax bill?
We could go back and look.
Yeah.
Okay, so Township of Moraine, they're quite small. They're 0.05 versus we're 0.55. So my goodness, we're 7%. I don't even know if they're 1%.
Okay, so it's not going to have a material difference.
No, they get a lot of their money from donations.
Yeah. Okay, so at this time, I'll turn it over to my fellow board members for any questions or comments. Does anybody want to start off?
I will. I can start off.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
I appreciate the presentation. I understood from the get-go what you were getting to, and I would say from one perspective, it was very directed, and I know what your goal is. My question is not just on the taxes, but the budget. And the money that we're talking about here is directed toward our capital expenses. for me to understand the way it works, I need to see what our operating budget is and what reductions we're going to be able to make to come out, which is another way of saving money for capital expenses. I don't know, I can't vote on this and comment on this in a vacuum.
Understood.
Right, so I guess if I understand Barney's question is, and Brian, maybe you can address this, is Brian Romes, obviously you're going through the budget process right now. Is between now and the time that we need to consider the levy, are you able to analyze the budget for operations to see if there's any ability to make a material savings in order to offset potential cuts in the capital plan if the CPI, if we decide to keep the levy flat and not increase for CPI?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly making significant decreases in the budget. And, you know, if you looked at things in one operating year, could we save the money from the levy? Likely that could be possible with cutting a significant amount of expenses, but that doesn't change the fact that going forward, we will have lost the compounding effect of increasing by the CPI this year, because eventually our programs are going to bounce back, our services are going to bounce back, and we're going to need to bring back some of those expenses. I don't think it would be fair to say that we could continue to cut year after year to make up for the lack of an increase in the CPI.
Well,
Could we follow up on that? Could we follow the city's model in cutting or I'll just use the word cut it, reducing the price of programming, but not or just doing something with regard to that rather than the real estate taxes?
So I think
would that provide a benefit to the community, or is that a possibility?
In my estimation, we'd be better off cutting it. It's probably, the problem is that we need the revenue, and expenses are going to go up to run those direct services that are provided to the community. So if expenses are increasing, the cost to deliver a program and service is increasing, per like the example that we showed with the IT expenditures. We know expenses are typically rising. And so if we're going to continue to deliver those same services to the community, it's really hard to charge less if the expenses are going to rise as well.
I understand that. So I guess let me ask this question a different way.
Yeah.
And is that it sounds like one of the talking points with regard to the real estate taxes is that we do not want to lose the compounding factor of it.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously that is a very important element where it may be easier to control because we don't lose the compounding factor. Is, let's say, for example, we either cut programming, we delete certain programming, or we reduce the cost because we don't run into that compounding issue. So if we wanted to provide relief, there's another way of doing it. Not necessarily has to be tied to the real estate taxes.
You could provide relief to those who participate in programs.
Okay.
It wouldn't be to the whole community, but yes.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So, but again, we would, yeah.
But we'd have to have some cuts. Obviously, we don't know what those cuts would look like with regard to programming, or if even it's possible. But what I heard at the last board meeting is that there was the sentiment by some of the board members is that they wanted to be sensitive to the tough times and try to help out members of our community. And the members of our community hopefully use our programming, our facilities, and our parks and everything. So there may be other ways of trying to do that without touching the real estate tax levy.
Which entails, I think, also some budget cuts so that we can display to the community while we're raising taxes, we're saving money we're giving you a benefit.
So here's my suggestion. I think I think this was a very worthwhile exercise that we just did. It's because what I saw here is that if there's a sentiment on the board to freeze the real estate taxes, I think we have to go back and look at our 5-year capital plan again and see if anything could be cut out of there to try to adjust those numbers, because those numbers are not sustainable. So looking at that, I think that we'd have to have a different approach if there's a sentiment on the board to try to provide some type of relief to our community members. That probably the better way, or easier, I should say the easier way and more beneficial to the district, is to look at the programming and those expenses and not our property taxes.
I like the way you're thinking.
Barney?
No, Cal, there's 3 elements. There are fees, which tie to taxes and budget. And now we see the presentation just now of the taxes and the impact, which 3.5 million is a lot better than the 11 million of losses. But I do see how it plays out for our capital budget, and there's some necessary capital expenses that have to be done. But again, somewhere we need to do something, and if it's that's why I'm saying a budget, I think now is really closely tied into this.
So here's my suggestion again, for comments from the fellow board members. My suggestion is that I'm comfortable hearing, number one, what the city's intending to do with regard to their levy, and what the 15 different park districts in the areas are doing with regard to their levy. I'm comfortable moving forward with the CPI increase and the new growth increase with regard to the 2021 tax levy. However, I think that the next presentation I'd like to see is with regard to those other 2 factors that Barney just mentioned, with regard to programming and programming fees, and see if there's anything that could be done there. There may not be, I don't know. But I think that I am not, at least I can speak for myself, I'm not comfortable on a short term, in a 30-day period, making a determination on the tax levy, because there's much more involved there. There's more issues involved, where I think that there may be other ways of trying to skin that cat and try to provide some relief to our constituents. So that's my thinking. And I don't know if Terry or Barney, you want to pipe in?
Or Brian.
I don't know if Brian's still here. Is Brian still here? I think we lost Brian.
Yeah, I think that this just makes us more nimble too. And that was really my point at the board meeting, is like you just said, I didn't know that topic was going to be brought up to begin with. And it was just very short notice for me to start thinking about that. Having just had this report about our CPI and our, I'm forgetting all the different, I'm about to say FBI, CIA.
Capital plan and things like that. And
well,
new growth.
What do we call the taxing? The
levy?
Levy. Sorry, that's not letters. But yeah, I just want, my impulse is to cut the burden on taxpayers, but I feel like we will really lose our ability to be flexible with that. So if there's another way of cutting the cost for people to participate, if that works, I'd love to explore that.
I'm not suggesting we do that. I think that that's the next area that we analyze.
Yeah, exactly.
Barney?
I totally agree.
Okay, so based on Lisa, and Brian Kaplan, you still here? Or you gone? I think Brian's gone. So I don't know if he was ever here. Just joking. So I think as a direction from the finance committee, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this is not the consensus, The consensus is that we'll move forward with the tax levy as staff has recommended with regard to the 2.3% CPI increase, along with the new growth. Again, that will have to be messaged to the community that we're not taking whatever that number was, 3.8%, that it's actually 2.3%. I would also message that this is consistent with what every other district in the area is doing. I'd leave the city out of it because we don't want to talk about what the city's doing, and we can message it that way. And then I think that in a future finance committee meeting, not necessarily the next one, but sometime in the near future, is that we can have a similar presentation with regard to programmings and fees as you re-examine. I know you do that on a consistent basis. You look at that stuff to see, number one, if these programs are profitable and trying to keep the revenues high and the costs low. I get you do that on a consistent basis, but if we could take another look at that and maybe sit down with the finance committee and just have that's the one issue on the one item on that agenda that night or that day, so we could take a look at that. And maybe that's not going to be one meeting, then it could be a series of meetings, but I think that's a worthwhile exercise. Unless anybody, is that pretty much the consensus of the board? Or the finance committee?
Sort of. Actually, unless I understand some budget changes and the proposal for fees, I'm not yet able to say I would approve a 2.3% increase.
Well, I was going to ask about that because maybe there is a percentage we feel more comfortable with, and we kind of start from that basis and work our way backwards or forwards. I was thinking about that as you were comparing the two rates. If we did do the full CPI levy compared to we didn't, one was over 3%, one was 1% or whatever. Is there some number that our board can come up with, and then as a budgetary process, work towards that number?
I think Terry, I think that we and correct me, Mary Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have to. When do we have to go back to? I don't want to go way back to the start. But when do we have to make a decision on the tax levy? When do we have to do that?
So the workshop in November is when you would vote on the resolution. So we would review the resolution at the workshop meeting in November, the board meeting in November. We would pass the resolution. Then the workshop meeting in December, you would look at the ordinance, and then you would vote to pass that ordinance at the board meeting in December. Then it has to be filed with the county.
See, unfortunately, I don't know if we have enough time between now and the middle of November to do a deep dive into the budget and to determine if there's a way to provide the savings there. I think that we can make a commitment to do that, and we can look at that, but I don't think that's going to get done in the next 3 weeks.
I am uncomfortable moving forward unless we have some indication of the direction that can go.
I don't understand what that means.
Well,
He wants to concentrate more on the budgetary aspect of it.
Right? I'm not saying we don't do that. I mean, I'm just saying is that that's not going to get done in the next 3 weeks.
Well, I haven't heard from staff that they can't provide something.
We could provide you some generalizations, but we won't be able to provide you a full budget. But I mean, if, we can certainly take a look at programming fees and expenses. We already know we're decreasing expenses. That's a given. We've decreased expenses consistently since the pandemic started, and that will continue next year. So you will see, that's going to happen. As far as fees, we can take a look at it, but again, if I'm going to provide the information that I think is most relevant to the board in presenting a budget that I think will protect the Park District's long-term assets and continue to allow us to be fiscally responsible with maintaining properties and parks and beaches and equipment. I think that to some degree, increasing fees also supports the Park District with the other 50% of revenue. So it's going to be a challenge to not increase fees, but we can take a look at certain aspects and get back to the board. But again, you know,
there are some fees that probably beg to be increased. I don't know what they are. There are some fees that may hit more people differently. But aside from just saying we'll reduce all fees 10%, I understand you want to look at all of the fees. But what I would like to see is a mock-up of a budget that is showing significant reductions. I'm not saying it's cast in stone, but I think.
Yeah, we can give you some generalizations and of what those decreases will be in expenses for sure. And we can probably even give you some generalizations in fees and charges. And of course, we can take a look at the comments that were made today in ways to, maybe we can get creative with other ways to save taxpayer money. We can look at that. I think staff definitely believes that increasing the CPI is important to make sure that we continue to do all the things we said in this presentation and ensure that we do have the necessary funds to support our assets and resources. But if there's ways that we can save the taxpayer per se or the program user, we can look at that and come back to the board with some type
What
of.
do you do, like to the board, or are you going to go to the finance committee with that?
Well, we'll go to the finance committee first. So we have, per our schedule, we have a process with the budget approval as well. And I believe our first presentation to the finance committee is mid-November. Is that right? Before the truth and taxation. Is that right, Marilyn? Do you have that schedule?
You know, I think that is true. I think at the yes, in November. It's after Veterans Day.
The 12th.
Yeah. So we will have an opportunity to look at the first draft of the budget before the resolution gets approved at the November 17th meeting.
I think we should push to have something very tentative, something earlier than that, because you've already moved down. I'm sure you're already well into the budget process.
Yeah, we can give you some generalizations.
And now it's a question of getting the eraser and changing the numbers, which I know is not easy. I know it's not easy. And there may be some things that are of a non-capital nature that you'll want to defer. There are maybe some things that will be, again, no replacement of staff, no replacement of, and I'll go on and just leave it at that. I'm sure there's going to be cuts, but we've got to. We can't go back to the community and have our same well-funded flush budget.
We're not. Yeah, no, it's a different budget. It's absolutely.
So here's my suggestion. My suggestion is that when you come to the finance committee with the board, with the budget, I think it'd be helpful and useful to compare it to last year's budget. So if we could see where your projections with regard to revenues, expenses, and how they stack up to where they were the prior year, because it's not going to be business as usual. Barney's right; it's not business as usual now because we're in a whole different world. So that we just can't use last year's budget as a template for this year's budget because things are much different. Yep. So I get that, and I empathize with your ability, with what you have to do with basically reinvent the district based on the constraints that we're dealing with COVID for 2021. So I'm sure you're all the way down the road doing that. So when you make that presentation, both to the finance committee and to the board, if you can make that comparison and draw the correlation so you can see what you're thinking, and then Barney could take out his pencil and see if there's anything else besides what you're offering is to try to provide relief to our constituents.
And let me just follow up with one more thing that Terry suggested. What would happen if we went for a 1.8% increase instead of 2.3%? I'm just throwing that out as we could be greedy and ask for 2.3% in some people's mind. But look, we reduced it to the bare minimum that we need to sustain. And is there a number that is the bare minimum that would get us through it? And I think that's what,
yeah.
Isn't that what you were suggesting, Terry?
Well, yeah, and I've actually, every time we've gotten to this levy conversation over the last 3 years, that's been a question, is, what is that actual number before we start pissing people off? Like, what do we absolutely need to not just survive, but to thrive as well? But we're a little bit more of survival mode now than then. But yeah,
So we can again come up with maybe some creative ways that we can accomplish what you're asking for. I would, again, I think staff's going to consistently caution against not levying the full CPI in any scenario, just because it's going to have an exponential effect on our ability, because we're tax capped, and once we don't ask for that increase, we can't get it. So, but there might be other ways that we can accomplish the end goal, which is by understanding that we're in a pandemic and there are maybe some things we can do to help the taxpayer, but it may not be through the CPI. We may be able to do something else. I think we can maybe look at that and get back to you.
That would be very beneficial to us.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, Marilyn, because you're the numbers person. Bear with me. I just want to show something off the top of my head for Terry. If we don't follow the CPI now at 2.3%, I think you said at the end of 10 years, we'd be $3.5 million down.
Right, that would be our most conservative estimate. We
Okay.
know.
Based on
Okay.
a 1.3 increase CPI per year.
Okay, but take an example of what would the decrease be if we did 1.8%? I'm just throwing that number out so I could look at it with Terry on the phone now. What would the effect of that be? Would it be a 10%?
I mean, I'm going to speak in right here. Brian, let me say, I would be against that, because any number we come up with would be arbitrary. It wouldn't be based on anything number, except that this is the number we're throwing out there. I'll take Brian Romes at his word that there's other ways to try to address and provide the relief that you're talking about, rather than I think that we're spending too much time on something that could potentially damage the district moving forward, when there's other ways of trying to create that relief.
All right, well, let's get to the other ways then. That's what we said.
Okay.
So quick. So there's a concern. Do we have to report this to the board? We have another meeting before we go to the board again, right?
We do. We have another finance committee meeting before this goes to the board for the first time. So November 4th, Mary Lynn, is that right?
The
5th is the next finance committee meeting. And then when this gets presented to the board is November 10th.
Okay. So on the October 27th park board meeting, this will not be on the agenda.
No.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So this will not be on the agenda. Okay.
Correct.
And so if it comes up at that meeting, we're going to punt to the following meeting, correct?
Correct. Well,
Okay.
that would be our recommendation. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Obviously, because remember, the public may have been observing our last meeting, and they may bring it up or something like that, and say we would just direct them that would be discussed at the November workshop meeting.
Yes.
there were people that they weren't listening, but they reviewed the notes and did note that. Like
Know
I just
what?
said. They noted our discussion on it last time.
Yes, I heard that too.
So Brian Romes, if you're available right after this, if I can just have a quick call about something completely unrelated.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Any other business from the board members, not including impacting the tax levy? Anybody else? Okay, no other additions to the agenda. Executive Director, do you have anything?
No.
Okay, hearing nothing, then I'll entertain a motion to.
Wait.
Sorry, Mary Lynn.
Mary Lynn has something.
You know,
Oh, okay.
It's okay. I just, and we'll send you out meeting invites, but the next two finance committee meetings, like we said, were on Thursday, November 5th at 4 p.m. and then Thursday, November 19th at 4 p.m.
Okay, the 5th, what's on the agenda on the 5th?
So we're going to have our updated financial forecast. It'll be early next month because
We have back-to-back board meetings.
Yeah, so we have to get that done. And so I'm not sure, we'll
Then
probably,
we'll readdress the tax levy again. We'll come back to you with the questions from today at that meeting with some information.
Okay. And so
Okay.
then we're meeting as a workshop on the 10th to consider the tax levy resolution. And then we're meeting again as a finance committee on the 12th to do the same, I guess, or
well, I have it for the 19th. Do we
Yeah,
have?
the
we're-
19th?
The 19th, yeah.
Is that the next? No, that's the finance committee meeting afterwards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there was a meeting that was canceled.
Okay, got it. And then when's the board meeting? Is it the 24th?
It's the
No, it's-
17th.
17th. So that actually, so that's, the budget will be discussed at the November 19th Finance Committee meeting, which is after the Truth and Taxation Resolution. So as I just stated, November 5th, we will have some follow-up on the tax levy based on the questions that were just brought to our attention for us to look at different ways to address the taxpayer with still increasing the CPI. We will address that next
Okay.
Finance Committee.
So my goal on the 5th would then be able to hopefully have either a recommendation or if we're unable to come up with a recommendation, that we can at least report to the board workshop meeting on the 10th what the finance committee is thinking.
Yep.
Okay, is that okay with you, Barney? Is it okay
Yeah.
with you?
It's
Terry?
fine, thank you.
Okay, so that's the goal. And the 5th is hopefully to come to some type of consensus with regard to the tax levy, so we can either make a recommendation or not make a recommendation with regard to the tax levy to the board on the 10th. And then we will undertake the budget when? Start talking about the budget? The 5th and the,
We've got a while on the budget. We've got a few Finance Committee meetings, and then it will be presented to the board not until January. Approval is not until February.
I know, but to address what Barney's concerns with regard
Oh,
to,
so I will attempt to give some high-level summaries at the next meeting, Finance Committee meeting, along with the creative solutions to address the taxpayer, as we just talked about. But we won't be able to give the full budget draft
that's
until
fine.
November 19th meeting.
Yeah, I remember we pushed that back this year, right?
Yes.
Right.
we
We
did.
pushed the budget back, right?
Okay, great. Okay,
Oh,
I
wait,
think
wait,
we-
Cal, give me
Yeah.
a second. I'm sorry. I know our meetings are, let me move that phone, hold it. Oh, you got a call from Washington DC. Do you think it's,
I think maybe it's,
Getting ready for the debates.
maybe Donald Trump wants to do some debate prep with you.
he wants to go over the budget?
Yeah.
Okay. The meetings are at 4:00 to accommodate the school schedule. If Terry goes into remote, does that mean, Terry, that we could meet earlier in the day?
Well, it's interesting. I was just talking to Brian Romes about that. My schedule does not change. As a matter of fact, I haven't done anything different all year. It just the kids' schedules have changed. But I did say, since our meetings are on Thursday, I have more flexibility on Thursday than any other day of the week. So if 4:00 is a killer, I could try to work around it, but again, I would probably max out at an hour.
No, let's keep it where it is then.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely do not have time more than an hour, no matter what day it is.
Okay.
All right, anything else, guys?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, there's a motion
Second.
by President Rundberg. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by Commissioner Grossberg. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. The meeting's adjourned at 5:43
Okay.
p.m.
Holmes, Brian, I'll call you in a second.
All
All right,
right.
thanks, everyone. Mary Lynn,
thank you
nice
all.
presentation. Nicely done tonight.
All right, good job.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.